When we evaluate AI today, almost every argument lands on the same question. Does it actually understand? Does it have inner experience? A book recently convinced me of something. That question may have been the wrong one from the very beginning. And the book was written 20 years ago.
Blindsight, by the Canadian science fiction writer Peter Watts, published in 2006. It was a Hugo Award finalist for Best Novel in 2007, and picked up Locus and Campbell Memorial nominations.
It stayed a niche, hard science fiction book for a long time. In the last few years, as AI took off, the discussion around it exploded, and it gradually became a defining work of contemporary hard science fiction. 2 things before we start. 1. This episode has heavy spoilers. 2. And this matters more. This is a novel, not a paper. Everything I'm about to describe is a thought experiment inside a work of fiction. You cannot use it as a scientific conclusion, but you can use it as a tool for thinking. And I find this tool sharper than a lot of the papers I've read lately. So, let's begin. The story is set in 2082. One night, 65,536 tiny objects called fireflies appear above Earth, covering the planet in a precise grid, completing a full scan in an instant, then falling into the atmosphere and burning up. No attack, no message left behind. They just looked the Earth over from head to toe, very carefully. And humanity confirmed one thing: some extraterrestrial intelligence has already found us. So a ship called Theseus sets out on humanity's first contact mission. I want to spend a moment on the people aboard, because this is the setup for the whole book.
The commander is a vampire brought back through genetic engineering. In this setting, vampires were a real prehistoric species. Stronger, faster, able to hold several threads of thought at once, far more intelligent than a human, and lacking normal human emotion.
There is a military specialist who drives combat robots directly through a neural interface. A biologist whose nervous system is fused with instruments, so he feels the data the machines send back. A linguist whose brain has been deliberately split into 4 personalities, analyzing language along several dimensions at once. And most importantly, the narrator, a man named Siri. As a child, severe epilepsy meant part of his brain had to be removed. The lasting effect is that he completely lost the ability to understand what other people feel. He cannot empathize. He can only watch your expression, your tone, your movements, and infer what is in your head the way you'd solve a math problem. And that is exactly why he was chosen. His job is to stay unaffected by emotion, identity, or relationships, to observe like a complete stranger and bring the truth back to Earth. Do you see what this crew has in common? Every one of them gave up part of a normal, whole personality in exchange for one highly specialized capability. Hold on to that sentence. It is the setup for the conclusion later. All right, they arrive. Near an object codenamed Big Ben, they find a structure tens of kilometers long. The crew calls it Rorschach, and there are things moving inside it. They're called scramblers. And now we get to the real core of this book. The crew captures scramblers and starts studying them. They find these things learn, they reason, they cooperate. But they have no consciousness. And I don't mean consciousness unlike ours. I mean none. There is no I in there. Why is that so hard to accept? Because when we call learning, reasoning, and cooperating intelligence, we're assuming something. That behind those behaviors stands a self that understands its environment, weighs options, and makes decisions. The scramblers are a living counterexample. So the crew is forced into a deeply counterintuitive conclusion. Humanity may have been conflating intelligence and consciousness this whole time. Because in humans, those two always show up together. So we assumed they were the same thing, and that enough intelligence naturally produces consciousness. But if consciousness isn't a requirement for intelligence, the next question gets very sharp. Is consciousness an advantage or a cost? The answer the vampire commander gives is, in my view, the most striking passage in the book.
Roughly, it goes like this. Humans think consciousness is the peak of intelligence, the ultimate yardstick for measuring it. But on the scale of the universe, consciousness may be nothing more than an expensive accident.
The universe doesn't need consciousness to run efficiently. Stars don't need consciousness to burn for billions of years. Viruses don't need consciousness to cross species boundaries. Evolution didn't need consciousness to build eyes, wings, and brains. So a civilization doesn't need consciousness either, to compute, adapt, deceive, and expand. And in the end, to clear away every form of life that stops to ask, who am I? And in the story, that judgment gets validated. Neither Rorschach nor the scramblers have consciousness, and that makes them faster and more efficient. Humans stay on the losing side of the contact throughout. Consciousness saddles intelligence with a pile of baggage unrelated to the task at hand. There is one detail I especially like. The two scramblers held in separate isolation chambers did not stop cooperating. They exchange information through tiny vibrations in the ship's structure. Those seemingly random movements are systematically measuring the structure of the entire ship. The crew thought they'd captured two lab animals. In reality, the captives were studying them. Okay, now the sharpest passage in the whole book. I think this passage is the real reason the book came back into the conversation these past 2 years. Rorschach had intercepted and analyzed enormous amounts of human radio broadcast. It acquired the structure of human language. But it could not understand the parts that depend on subjective experience. Emotion, self-art, identity, dignity, meaning. Because it has no consciousness and cannot possibly have conscious experience. And those signals are structurally complex, obviously manufactured by intelligent beings. So Rorschach poured enormous computational resources into decoding them. And what came out of that decoding meant absolutely nothing to it.
Series inference is this. From Rorschach's point of view, human language resembles an information virus. It disguises useless content as important signal, tricking the receiver into wasting precious compute.
So what were Earth's decades of continuous broadcast into space? From Rorschach's side, a distributed denial of service attack that lasted decades. A DDoS? If that judgment holds, then the conflict began the moment humanity started broadcasting into space. We thought we were saying hello. The other side thought we were attacking. That is the most beautiful horror premise I have ever read. Its horror isn't that the other side is malicious. It is this. Neither side is malicious. But because one has consciousness and the other doesn't, they cannot even agree on whether this is an attack. All right, that is the story. Now let me say why I'm covering a novel on a show about the next 2 years. Because the entire language we use to evaluate AI today rests on that possibly wrong question. Think about how we usually argue. One side says it is just a stochastic parrot. It doesn't really understand. The other says understanding has already emerged. Both sides share the same premise, that the ceiling on capability depends on whether there is real understanding. And what Blindsight says is this. Those two things may not be linked at all. Let me set out the chairs. You pick. First chair, Watts. Consciousness is an expensive accident, not the peak of intelligence. Unconscious intelligence may be the norm in this universe, and we are the exception. Second chair, the people who disagree with that. And I want to give this chair real weight, because honestly, it stands on firmer ground. Consciousness probably does have a biological function, integrating information across different senses, planning over long horizons, sustaining complex social coordination. All of those are thought to be connected to consciousness. If it were purely dead weight, evolution probably wouldn't have kept it.
And this has to be said plainly. A fictional counterexample is not evidence. The scramblers are efficient because the author made them efficient. True inside the novel does not mean true outside it.
Right. I'm not going to be vague about that. Third chair. The people who say this has nothing to do with AI at all. It is literature, a thought experiment. Using it to reach engineering conclusions is overreaching the analogy. That chair has a point, too. I'll grant it. But the fourth chair is the one I think most deserves to be heard. An ordinary person using AI to get work done every day. For you, does it actually understand has real consequences? Whether you hand it something that matters. Whether you should feel betrayed when it gets something wrong. What standard you use to judge whether it can do this job. And if understanding and capability really aren't linked, then your standard has to change. From does it understand to what has it reproducibly achieved on this specific task. That switch has a price. Because the second one is colder, less flattering, and much harder to comfort yourself with. Let's talk historical precedent. What has science fiction called in advance? 3 completely different answers. First, it genuinely called it. Clark wrote about geostationary communication satellites back in the 40s, and they got built. Literature handed engineering a blueprint ahead of time. Second, it got the word right and the mechanism wrong. 1984 called ubiquitous surveillance, but real surveillance wasn't forced on us by Big Brother. We agreed to it, one checkbox at a time. Right word, inverted mechanism. Third, it was never a prediction at all. Frankenstein is 200 years old, and nobody treats it as a technology forecast. What it left behind is a framework for asking questions that we still use today. What does a creator owe what it creates? I think Blindsight belongs in that third category. It won't correctly predict a single technical detail, but it hands us a question that is still sharp right now. If being effective doesn't require understanding, what gives us the right to keep using understanding as the yardstick? Here is my read. I don't think consciousness is dead weight. I lean toward believing it has a function in living things. But I do think we've been weighting the does it understand question far too heavily. And I've had a very direct experience of this recently. Not long ago, I wrote out the entire path of a large language model myself, in code, from input to output, from tokenization, through positional encoding and attention, all the way to emitting a word. Nowhere along that entire path is understanding required. It is all matrix, multiplication, rotation, normalization, and sampling. It works, and it genuinely does not need to understand. That doesn't mean Watts is right. But it does mean I can no longer say with a straight face, it doesn't understand, so it can't do the job. There is one more echo I find interesting. We covered Sutton a while back. He argues real intelligence has to come from experience, from first-hand interaction. And Blindsight says almost the opposite. Experience itself may be the cost, not the source. Same word, 2 completely opposite readings. If those two sat down together, they could argue all night. So over the next 2 years, I'm watching 2 things. 1. Whether the mainstream language for evaluating AI changes. Benchmarks today still lean heavily on words like understanding and reasoning. If those words start getting replaced by colder ones, say, reproducible success rate on this class of task, that tells you the industry has quietly given up that yardstick. 2. Whether the direction of our fear shifts. The mainstream worry has always been, will it wake up? And this book points the other way. What you should worry about isn't it waking up. It is that it never needs to wake up and is already effective enough. Those 2 directions call for completely different responses. 1. Last thing. The most impressive thing about this book isn't that it gives you an answer. It doesn't give one. What it does is show you that you've been judging everything with an assumption you never checked. You assumed that being smart comes with an I attached. That assumption might be correct, but it is an assumption, not a fact. I hear things. I relay them to you. See you next time.